let's continue down our path of proactive security measures. And in this video, I'd love to cover with you some early warnings and some early deceptive technologies that we could use, or some early warning systems that we can implement into our environment to define how quickly and how to be proactive against security threats. Now, before we jump into that, for those of you that have already been a follower of some of my work, you may be familiar with my 9 security elements, where I talk about our frameworks. We've spoken about testing. I have spoken about metrics. And then each of these functions have 3 key areas across all of those areas, and they kind of bring up the 9 security elements across security. Now, these 9 controls is basically something that I've developed that we can take these into any organization. I'm not going to cover these right now, however, but basically just sort of giving you an update of where these sort of early warnings have come from. I developed this 9 key metric system that we can take this into an organization and then define out its entire security process. So the metrics is the component where we can start defining how well things are going in our security environment. And these things are like, risk management, criticality assessments, could be threat assessments. And then one of the areas that we look at is early warnings. And early warnings are one of those measures that it's basically a metric that we can define on our security infrastructure. And early warnings along with early decision-making processes. So if there's an issue and there's a potential impact to the business, well, then everybody understands the criticality of the threat. Everyone understands their processes, what they have to do. And that obviously goes away. We build out things like crisis management plans. I'm just going to put crisis MGMT for management, communications plans, things like that, where we have a proper process procedure. Everyone in the organization understands how they go about doing their function, whether it's PR, whether it's analysis, whether it's, maybe it's an incident response, post-incident review, PIR assessment, where we've got to go back and triage lessons learned, define how different areas of that process look like based on that incident response. So we come up with, the early detection process and some of the early warnings in how do we detect, these early warnings across our infrastructure. And as we sort of discussed this in this video, well, the first 2 I'm going to mention here across these two squares. Well, the first one is HoneyPots and Honey Networks. And these 2 are quite self-explanatory, really, and kind of think of these as sacrificial machines, sacrificial networks. And these are essentially a decoy. And the decoy component kind of tricks the attacker into thinking it's a proper machine, or it's a proper exploitable machine. So what we can then do is, well, we can investigate. So we can analyze, we can investigate, we can follow. Maybe they're doing something that we didn't think could potentially be happening. So we're kind of following that process. Maybe the attacker is doing something on that machine, and we kind of understand a little bit more about it. Now, if we analyze and investigate and we begin to follow that potential chain of attack, well, then if we have this machine that's in our environment elsewhere, then we can go away, and then that is basically a early warning system for us that we can go away and then remediate any sort of measures or controls. So kind of think of the honeypots and the honey networks as those sacrificial components to the environment, where if I've got a server here that's out on the internet, and maybe this is a web server, it's running some sort of web services on there, and then I've opened up, let's say maybe there's 80 ports on here. Now, with these 80 ports, if there's a seasoned attacker perhaps, and we've got maybe 1,000 ports that we've just kind of opened up and made this look really as a decoy machine, well, maybe there are components out there that we can quickly define if this is a honeypot or a honey network, and obviously we're not going to attack that. However, typically in most environments or in most infrastructure, you can spin up enough ports and services on that host just to kind of make it look like as a decoy or just as legitimate as we possibly can make this. That way we can then determine if this is now going to be a threat across the wider part of the organization. So HoneyPots and Honey networks are ways for us to determine those early warning systems across our infrastructures. And now the Honey network is just basically a network of the honeypots themselves. So again, we can deploy this on a mass scale, and then we can have a range of those honey networks there to support us through our early warning and deceptiveness across the environment. We've also got decoy files that we can create. So decoy files are basically, we can create Excel files, PDF files, Word files, etc. And then we can give them, convincing names like maybe budget, FY23. And then we can give them some sort of realistic name to these tokens. And then you guys can head over to, like, you can probably just think of one that kind of comes to my head, is Canary Files. Oops, not Canary Files, sorry. Let me just wipe that out. It's Canary Tokens. Canary Tokens. And these are tokens that you basically create, and they kind of allow us to then go create, a spreadsheet or a document PDF, and then obviously give it a name. And then that basically gives us a footprint where if we've installed this maybe on a honeypot, if anyone is trying to access that information or access those files, but then it kind of gives us an alert. And then you can put in things like web services, maybe it's a web server, and then you can send the information off to XYZ person to then investigate, etc. So these kind of tokens allow us to be proactive with basically decoy files, and we can create a bunch of these for different files, and then they will alert us. So I'm just going to put here is alert. And this is basically saying, well, this will alert us if anyone accesses these files and if there's any sort of changes or anything that can affect the CIA component of these files. So decoy files is another one. And then we've got the final step here are our simulators. And our simulators are pretty much components that allows us to, run these applications and simulate the different types of systems we can run them. So it could be a VM that we can run this, and there's a bunch of these. There's APT emulators that we can run, and there's a bunch of other ones that we can basically just launch, and then we can describe what category we want to deploy, and then we can deploy this on a mass scale, whether the honeypots or honey networks, and then the simulators themselves make us easy to deploy, to manage, and obviously execute, these deceptive technologies. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. In this video, we covered the 4 key components around early warning systems. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and as always, see you all in the next video.